you start to add each of the other elements of like awareness that you're dreaming in a dream, of perhaps some degree of lucidity, not only about the fact of dreaming, but also maybe the ability to control certain aspects or maybe all aspects of the dream, which can get very profound. The sense of hyper-lucidity, which I mentioned as a possibility. So if you add in the quality of like hyper-vividness, where reality seems strikingly more bright, poignant, compelling, vivid, iridescent, scintillating, as if one was on some powerful substance or having a very powerful spiritual experience, where dreams can become extremely lucid. And then like seemingly more real than ordinary life, more compelling emotionally, sensorily than ordinary life.
Hi, I'm Ricky DeRiz. Welcome to episode 59 of the Mind That Ego podcast. Daniel Ingram returns to the show following our first conversation, Awakening and the Search for Meaning. Daniel is best known for his cult classic, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, within which he maps the stages of insight. He is also an emergency medicine physician and part of the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, EPRC, which aims to integrate spiritual, mystical, or energetic experiences into healthcare systems. Continuing the Dream series, our conversation explores how Daniel integrates dreams into the stages of insight. He shares his definition of standard, symbolic, lucid, and hyper-lucid dreams. We look at a host of intriguing spiritual experiences within dreams, including vivid sense perception, out-of-body experiences, guru transmission, Kundalini awakenings, meditating in dreams, ego-transcendence, no-self dreams, and the continuum between dreams, imagination, and the dreamlike nature of waking reality.
Maybe to begin, could we look at how would you describe a dream, just in a very straightforward way? I know it's probably not straightforward, but from your worldview, how would you describe dreaming?
Okay, so just a little bit of background maybe to start. I started having like lucid flying dreams when I was 5. And that was when the world of dreaming suddenly seemed to become vastly more relevant, interesting, fascinating to me. And then that had a major impact on the rest of my life as it was exploring practices related to dreams that got me into deeper meditation territory and really opened up a lot of things. So just this little bit of background to that. And then as something of a mapper, as a self-admitted hyper categorizer, then of course one applies that to the world of dreams. And so since then, I've read all kinds of things about dream yoga and astral travel and out of body things, and how do you analyze dreams? So I've gone on quite a journey of how do you think about dreams, and have a lot of different influences, as you'll see, just as some background to what I'll then say. So obviously, the general idea is that one is asleep, right, to this world. The body is laying there in a bed, from somebody's point of view anyway. And then one is having a dream. Now, just to sort of back up from that, as what would seem like a straightforward assumption, if you practice long enough and hard enough and run into enough strange experiences, everything we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. You can get into perspectives like that, which I can entertain. I don't know if when you were asking me to define what is a dream, if you were thinking of going to this waking experience as also having some dreamlike qualities, some fabricated, if you will, qualities, or constructed or pre-processed or malleable, or perhaps, dreamlike aspects, however you think of dreams. So, but I'm going to start first with the easier topic of when the body appears to be asleep, again, from some external point of view, and we're in REM states or whatever we're in, from a ordinary sleep, medical Western-y point of view, and we start having dreams. So the level of dreams is, to me, like, first, you've got dreams where you're not particularly conscious, you're not particularly awake, you're not particularly aware that you're dreaming. The story seems sort of compelling in and of itself. I dream in full color, full sense doors. I can smell sometimes in dreams, hear in dreams, see in dreams, things. Not everybody has that. Like my grandmother just dreamt in stories. like someone reading a story.
Right,
like
cool.
it was purely like an auditory experience. So, obviously everyone's dream life is different. Actually, she dreamed just in stories until she started taking L-Dopa for Parkinson's, and then started having vivid dreams. Had never had them before, but they were nightmarish. So obviously this is a changeable thing, right? I also know lots of people who have like said, "Oh, when I smoke a lot of pot, I don't dream anymore." So like obviously our relationship to dreams can change a lot. So you have the sort of low level dreams, what most people kind of think of as like a standard dream. You're in the dream, you don't know you're dreaming, you don't have any unusual control of the dream. There's no sort of hyper-lucidity. And it's just sort of like circumstances playing out that may be in some way related to your life. Now, even that from a Freudian or Jungian point of view can be very, very powerful, right? Because the themes, the ideas, where did the content come from? Why are you dreaming that particular thing? Obviously are all fascinating questions we could get into. But then as you start to add each of the other elements of like awareness that you're dreaming in a dream, of perhaps some degree of lucidity, not only about the fact of dreaming, but also maybe the ability to control certain aspects or maybe all aspects of the dream, which can get very profound. The sense of hyper-lucidity, which I mentioned as a possibility. So if you add in the quality of like hyper-vividness, where reality seems strikingly more bright, poignant, compelling, vivid, iridescent, scintillating, sensor, as if one was on some powerful substance or having a very powerful spiritual experience where dreams can become extremely lucid. And then, like seemingly more real than ordinary life, more compelling emotionally, sensorily than ordinary life. And then, adding on to that, there's like the question of like traveling out of dreams, like out of body travel out of a dream, where like, and what differentiates a travel from a dream? That's an important point. So travels tend to have a kinetic quality to them, at least for me. They tend to have like an obvious lift out where suddenly they tend to respond really fast to anything related to intention. And then they're characterized, at least for me, pretty much universally by a sense of a snapback, like that sense of like the elastic cord people mention. It can kind of feel like that, where all of a sudden there's like if you lose like the coherent attention to the dream, or the mind drifts to something else, or sometimes from a shocking thing that happens in the travel, you snap back and then you're awake sort of at that point. You snapped back to something. And then often, at least for me, there's at least a moment or two of some sort of paralysis, like a sleep paralysis sort of a thing as I'm coming out. And then often kind of a weird buzzy integration thing. People have described this in out-of-body travel. Not always. I don't have always have all of those elements, but those are pretty common. So you can have, so this gives in the question of like normal dreams, lucid dreams, the various dreams of control, elements of control, hyper-lucid dreams, plus minus maybe extremely high degrees of control, trending then into full out-of-body travels, and then, so those are kind of the levels I think of as dream. How do you think of as dreams? And how do you, what are the kind of frameworks or criteria or things you apply?
Well, I love that answer. That's exactly why I wanted to speak to you about this, because it takes off. So some of the interviews I've had so far, a lot of my focus is in that Jungian, I'd say in the Jungian model, the idea of symbols, archetypes, the imaginal realm. And I feel like because that whole field really, it was towards the end of Jung's life that he started to look more into like the unus mundus and synchronicity, the collective unconscious, the interconnected nature of reality, that there is, and I didn't mean this as a drawback at all, but there is a strong focus on the individual. All imagery is your psyche, at least most imagery is your psyche, is something in your inner world, your inner experience. And there's so much truth to that. But I feel what you're talking to are the further reaches, not only of extending beyond the individual dreamscape, which in itself is massive, if not infinite to some degree, but going into the transpersonal in that dreamscape. And that's exactly, I love your way of thinking there. And for me, it is I've had dreams that aren't applicable to that individual isolated psyche, no matter how psychedelic or how enchanted that may be. And the term, this like hyper-lucidity that you talk to, that's something for me that has been probably the biggest paradigm shift in my understanding. This sense of realer than real, where the perception in the dream is almost like for shorthand, I'll use the imaginal, but as if the imaginal domain is somehow richer than the visible, and yet they're part of the same fabric. So that's a bit of a kind of freestyle off of what you said, but I'm so excited by this because it's exactly what I want to explore around the approach in these dimensions, not just as a process of imagery, but the actual atomized qualities of it as well. So I don't know what that brings up for you.
Nice. Well, I mean, there obviously each of those topics we could go on about for hours. I just realized that as you were talking, there's also, as you mentioned, stuff about like Jung brought up the sense of like some dreams I have seem unusually resonant, like archetypally resonant, like they clearly have a thematic power that is profound. Right. Okay. There's some message there. Other dreams I have, like fever dreams, are just sort of rambling or vague or confused or don't seem to really go anywhere. And maybe that has its own archetypal message from a certain point of view. But one way or the other, they sort of lack that sense of like deep meaning, with capital letters. And then there's the other thing of dreams that like appear to withstand reality testing, like, I think I'm dreaming, but oh wait, no, this is real. I can touch this. This is real. Like I have dreams where I'm seemingly quite lucid, but yet my attempts at falsifying the fact that I'm dreaming fail. Meaning, I lucidly come to the conclusion that I am in fact awake in the dream and that this is reality. And yet there's a lucidity. So there are lucid dreams where there is a quality of lucidity, and yet there is not the awareness of dreaming. And even intentional attempts to falsify the thesis of whether or not, I am dreaming fail, meaning that I test the dream and I come to the conclusion that I'm awake. Right. And then there are nested dreams, like, you've probably had these if you're into this stuff, like where you're in a dream and then you wake up and you think, oh, now I'm awake. And then you wake up and you think, oh, now I'm awake. So like Inception style, I've literally had that 7 layers deep one time.
Really?
It just kept happening and I kept being wrong about the fact that I was, and then
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Those kinds of elements where you have lucidity, but you still think you're awake. You don't think you're dreaming, right? You've somehow become compelled enough by the dream to believe that it's real.
I think your use of lucidity matches mine, because I think some people, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but some people just assume that all lucid dreaming is the awakening awareness. This is a dream, as you described there. There's a lucidity. I use it as how would I describe it? Like the intensity of my perception in the dream, usually visual, a very strong visual stimulus, but also emotional. So sometimes I'll describe a dream that's really lucid, even if I'm not aware in the dream. The lucidity of the perception in the dream is so awe-inspiring, and so it's almost like an altered state within the dream, that lucidity then questions I guess the definition of real. And I saw you write about this as well, but the definition of real and what these quote unquote dimensions are. I've had similar. I've had actually an awakening in a dream, but then a few times I'm just investigating the environment and looking at like, what is this? What is the substance of the environment? Because it doesn't seem dreamlike. It seems tangible in some sense. So I like that distinction of lucidity being more expansive than just awakening in a dream, but perhaps the amplification of sensory experience in the dreamscape.
Yeah. Like each of these are elements that you can have independent of each other, and then which ones were present and when, and often they will evolve in a dream. It's not uncommon for me to have a dream where there's a whole lot of memories of dream, but I can't really remember it very well. And like the dream is coming in with this whole sort of long formed backstory. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm dreaming. And now I'm kind of much more aware of the dream. And then that might go to a more lucid dream and then maybe a hyper-lucid dream. And then sometimes these things will progress and sometimes regress where like I'm extremely aware that I'm dreaming and then I get caught by the dream and I get back into it and then I lose that awareness. So these can be very dynamic things. So it's easy to classify, oh, a dream was this. Well, most of the time a dream had these elements that may have unfolded in some, complicated, more or less sequence, nonlinear sequence.
Yeah. But how, because there's the default stance. You talk to like a Jungian analyst, they'll refer a lot to the dream ego, the individual point of view. And I'm going in the deep end now because we started there, so I'm going to stay with it. Something I'm really interested in your take on is, again, a conventional view would be that the dream ego is mostly what we experience in a dream scenario, that is usually a conscious perspective. If we're talking of perception, usually it's like an I sense. I'm in this scenario, I'm with these people. Sometimes maybe more vague, like some kind of movement of consciousness or witnessing a scene. In terms of the dream ego and the waking ego, do you see parallels between like an awakening experience in waking life and in the dreamscape, and how that relates to a sense of an individual I?
Oh, that is also a huge topic, and a really important one. So early on, and there you mentioned this quality of insight in dreams, insight in the sort of, I'm going to wax a little bit Theravada Buddhist-y or like technical here, and talk about. The first thing is from sort of an insight stage point of view, and I don't know how much the reader or the listeners out there, hello out there in listener land, are aware of like the stages of insight, right? And various conceptions of them, various maps, various controversies about these. So I'm just going to talk from my point of view, the way I use these terms. There's an insight stage called the arising and passing away, Udayabhaya Jnana. It's the fourth of 16 insight stages in classical Theravadan Buddhism. Again, there's you can find endless controversy about how these should be defined and what they mean and how often they occur and all of that. But just the way I use the term, I'm not saying anybody else has to. This is a stage where like 6 to 8 days into a lot of 10-day insight retreats, for example, people will get into this stage. And it tends to involve like more energy, better posture, their concentration gets much stronger, their ability to perceive reality arising and vanishing might get very quick. They might have energetic experiences, vibrational movements, kriyas, bright lights, etc. It's also a stage when people often will have their first lucid dreams or like extremely lucid dreams where meditating in dreams actually becomes much more common. The sense of like investigating in dreams you mentioned, like what is this? How does this work? What is actually going on? The mind having enough investigative power that it somehow carries over into dreams. It's a common time for first out-of-body experiences, first Kundalini awakenings, first energetic openings, first like conversion experiences, like, oh my God, meditation or spirituality or whatever. It can also happen, again, this is controversial. Some people will disagree with me on this. It can happen as a result of some psychedelics, sometimes apparently spontaneously. I've had family members that it happened to for no obvious reason. They just suddenly found themselves in this territory through whatever life circumstances. And that's kind of what happened to me. I was a little bit meditative when this happened to me, but I was trying to actually have better lucid dreams the first time I got into this territory and visualizing flying before I went to sleep. So that's the first thing. And then that quality of insight in dreams where you might be able to recognize its impermanence or recognize individual sensate qualities or recognize these are thoughts and these are, visual sensations, or be able to perceive vibrations or to have that sense of waking up to like the luminosity of consciousness, or the sense of divine universal presence, or whatever the quality of your moments of insight are at that point, all of those things are vastly more likely to happen in dreams in that particular insight stage. So that's the first thing. And also, from my point of view, if someone is starting to suddenly get really interested in lucid dreams and hyper-lucid dreams, or folks had an OBE, out of body experience, then the next question I have is, are they in that insight stage, right? So you can sort of look back and go, oh, are these other things happening too? If they meditated, what do they experience? How fast and quick and precise is their mind now? How does that compare to how it was before? So you can often use, at least from my point of view, these dream things to get the suspicion, oh, maybe this person is going through some sort of classical insight territory. Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what's going on with them. And if you, as a listener out there in listener land, hello, are suddenly interested in dreams, and wow, I just had this powerful lucid dream, and I'm watching this because like the algorithm is noticing that I'm suddenly really interested in this, maybe you should check out a little bit of insight meditation theory and think, hey, could I be going through some sort of insight process? Is the first thing I think about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, in response, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nigel Hamilton's book, Awakening Through Dreams. It's just out of
oh, nice.
I can't quite reach it. Awakening Through Dreams.
Oh, sounds great.
It's awesome.
I should check this out.
Please, yeah, I highly recommend it, because he has a background as a Jungian and also a Sufi meditator, and he links. He brings stages into the dream world that link to the alchemical stages of transformation. It's mind-blowing the way that he does this, and it links to what you're saying, and also to my experience of there is a mirroring when there's an intent, sometimes spontaneously, but if there is an intentional practice, there can be carryover. I'm going to just bring in some of my dreams, not to get too caught up in them, but just as examples. But for me, when I went through, let's say, an original kind of Kundalini energetic opening experience, that was happening a lot in meditation. But I had,
that's that territory.
In that territory, I had two dreams I really remember. One was meeting, it was a female figure. A Jungian would say the anima, but I remember meeting this female figure and then having a huge, just energetic, blissful experience and waking up and being like, I'm not sure what that was, but I had the sense of bliss and death simultaneously, and it was almost like I died into waking up. If that makes sense. Such a profound experience. And I had another one.
Thanateros, sex and death.
Oh, there you go. That's something to explore, and maybe for me to journal about deeply as well. The other one was maybe within a year or two of that dream. And I was walking down a street by a bookshop, and there was just an aura to this bookshop, and I was compelled to go inside. And I went in, sat on the sofa, and I was waiting for like a special guest or someone that I knew I wanted to see. And this guru figure walked out eventually from the back room and just tapped me on the forehead. And when I was tapped on the forehead again, I had a similar blissful, electrifying, awakening death experience. And I was inspired.
Actually, my friend Patty did that to me long ago. She just put her hand on my chest.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't expecting it at all. Some people can do that sometimes. It's a thing.
Yeah. There's also, because I had that dream, and then I started to search for, synchronistically, there was stuff around like transmission, guru transmission, like the energetics,
et cetera.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So that's one realm that you're talking to, the Kundalini, and the different energies. From that, there's so much we can discuss. But from that, maybe we could look at the emotional states. So linked to bliss or to all these what we might call transcendent states, whether they can be defined as emotions. I know that a lot of earlier dream theory was very much on like difficult emotions, processing anger, rage, grief, etc. How would you view the full spectrum of emotion, but going from difficult emotions to experiences of awe, experiences of bliss in the dreamscape?
Obviously a huge topic, so I'm just going to do an extremely superficial treatment. In my own experience, in my own life, I have noticed that my dreams very often have what I call the standard dream pattern. And the standard dream pattern is that I'm not particularly lucid or awake. And then all of a sudden I start getting cool abilities, like I might be able to jump a long way or like skate like on cement as if it was ice, or can fly in various modes, either like pushing flying where I'm pushing off my feet, or swimming flying, or like, sort of like intending out this way and going that way flying. There's a bunch of different types of flying and how they kind of work. And that phase of the dream often will have some sensual or blissful or sexual or erotic content, right? Is pretty common. And I think of that as like A and P territory, powers and lucidity and joy and bliss and pleasure and rapture and, maybe archetypal qualities. You mentioned an archetypal female presence or something like that. Anyway, so stuff like that. And then things will often turn sinister. I can't fly in the same way. I'm like, people can grab my feet, or they're trying to grab or I can't escape, or I'm constricted, or suddenly I'm being chased or in combat, some sort of archetypal struggle, underworld challenge, conflict thing. And then if I can stay dreaming through that, sometimes there will become like a big boss person that I try to fight, like in some sort of like, kind of cartoony video gamey sort of, Marvel Comics kind of way or whatever. And then if the dream goes on long enough, another pattern is that we like come to recognize each other as equals. Like we cannot kill each other or destroy each other through magical combat or whatever. And then there's like oh, and then the dream will usually shift to then what I think of as the equanimity phase, out of the sort of dark nighty, underworldy phase, which then is usually expansive, luminous, symbolic, profound, vast, like might have like golden symbols floating in the air, or incredibly beautiful three-dimensional nature with trees that do all the right perspective, things as parallax as you move around them, or like beautiful gardens, or flying up into space in clouds of light, or something quite open, expansive, equanimous, transcendent, profound, beautiful, interconnected, like transcendent is a good word, or equanimous. Yeah. Anyway, I'm using the same words again and again as I had tried to describe something very powerful. And so that's, and not all dreams will contain all of those elements. I kind of just put together like a kind of a stereotypical compilation. But that pattern is very common in my own dreams and trajectory. And it, to me, seems to also mirror insight stages in terms of what attention is doing, how life feels. Also in that that last stage is a common time to have insights that then might precede later insights. So like when I was going through a lot of like path cycles or whatever, these various stages of insight, or, what I described like in my 20s and early 30s, it was not uncommon for me to sort of get some hint of the realization that I was looking for in a dream some days or weeks before that would actually happen in waking life. So sometimes my dream insight life was actually ahead of my walking around practice, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been going on and on, but, and then, and then like even weirder, like I've had teaching dreams. Like I had this one dream where I was like a Tibetan monk and I was sitting up on some front cushion, and I was giving some talk on Dzogchen or Mahamudra, like basically kind of direct pointing stuff. And I felt myself like shifting into that space of like embodied transmitting, of like attempting to transmit the sense of spacious, awake awareness, naturalness, ephemerality, everything knowing itself where it was naturally, like to all of the monks that were sitting in front of me. Like, and I could only see I can imagine the comments section now, like, oh, Daniel's so grandiose or something. It's a dream. Get over yourselves. Anyway, whatever. Sorry. Like, so, but, like those kinds of experiences actually were very powerful and memorable. I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that?
Oh, so powerful. So cool. Yeah. Just to in terms of the potential ego inflation, I've had dreams that I'm Jesus, so it's fine. Like,
Yeah, dreams.
I- what's interesting is, yeah, again, in that Jungian framework, which I do use kind of shorthand at times, but the numinous, or the religious experience, and
Yeah,
the difficulty when people start to identify with the imagery, in be it in dreams or be it in, waking visions, sense of initiation, the imaginal third eye awakening kind of stages as well. And that's something that I've noticed, that symbolic religious experience being one kind of experience. Something that also really stood out was where you mentioned, like, the insight stage being almost ahead of the waking reality. I've been really keen to get your thoughts on this, because I think when we last spoke, I've been through a long process. I don't know how much you remember of that conversation, but I've struggled with my mental health,
mm,
had experiences of psychosis, paranoia. In recent years, that elevated. And fortunately, I've still had enough distance from it to understand it, to learn from it, much in the same way we're now talking about dreams, to apply that to the paranoia, to the psychosis. And over time, it became clear that there was I know it's not quite a duality, because you're transcending that duality, but paranoia being like extreme isolation, extreme egoic solidity to some extent, and the flip then of what is the opposite of paranoia, to just use that, the sense of opposite, what would it be like for the reverse of that? And it became clearer that for me was a bit of a challenging tantric path of, of understanding the sense of self through the extreme of paranoia. Point being, I started to have dreams so it was really difficult in this state being around groups of people. It was really tough, felt a lot of sensitivity energetically, to the extent that I just went into my hermit stage that I'm still kind of recovering from.
mm,
I started to have dreams of being surrounded by lots of people. I used to go out clubbing a lot, so I'd have dreams of clubbing. I'd have dreams of being at like big, like vast dinners and really social environments. On one hand, one perspective would be, this is a compensation. That you're not so social in waking life, so there's a compensation. But the interesting thing in this dream was the dream ego, and that was the opposite of paranoia. I was having moments where I was in a group and I felt the emptiness of the dream ego, and I could anchor in. I was getting glimpses of that in my waking world, but in the dream, I could anchor into it in these different scenarios. And it was almost like
like a learning lab.
a learning, exactly. Yeah. A learning lab for being in social environments and having that sense of emptiness, maybe, or the perceived object that I was being a lot more permeable. So yeah, I wanted to share that and share
Nice.
it with you.
Wow.
Yeah, to see your thoughts on that.
Well, first, going back to the fact of paranoia teaching us a lot about ego and suffering and potentially being a source of insight is not a new theme. So, Buddhism itself can get incredibly dark.
Mm.
You look at plenty of sutras in the old text. The world is on fire with burning desire, and your house is on fire, and everything you know and love will fall, and your body will decay. And you meditate on corpses,
Hmm.
and people are greedy and stupid, and you should avoid them because the world is full of hateful, awful people doing terrible things to each other, cruel and vicious, and self-centered and unwise, and there's and it's not wrong. It's not like, right? Like, look at the news, look at the world, look at
Yeah.
the world history, look what people do to each other. There is another side to it, of course. People can be
Hmm.
loving and kind and amazing and social and altruistic and empathetic and all these good things and ethical too. But the sort of recognition of suffering and the fact that there are plenty of people who are out to get you, to steal your money and your data, and to coerce you into doing terrible things and supporting awful things, and those, yeah, sure. And social anxiety is real. Like, that's a hard thing to thing to deal with. In certain insight stages, after we go through blissful, peaceful experiences, these big openings, it's very common to get paranoid. Like, my friend Willoughby describes, like, how an insight retreat catapulted her into a lot of fear and terror, and that made a brilliant career out of researching. Then, okay, what is this? How do we do useful stuff about this? You can check out the work of Cheetah House, the beautiful things that came out of those challenging experiences, and being, and so we find that it is often in the dark night, challenging stages of, disgust, misery, fear, reobservation, desire for deliverance, reobservation, being like, oh, it's not a very well named thing, but, touching the deep end of our awful contracted madness and irritation and restlessness. So, those are considered a critical part of learning a better way of relating to reality. But sometimes for some people, it can be very painful and even life-threatening and even life-ending. I've had friends who this has gone horribly for, unfortunately, over the years. So, yeah, it's just sort of recognizing that there can be tremendous wisdom in finding some other perspective out of the suffering, some other spaciousness. And obviously, dreams are a great place for those explorations.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing there as well. And you're right. And I think part of this slippery slope is to discern within paranoia. We live in a paranoia-inducing culture.
And media has realized the number one thing to get people engaged is to make them more afraid and paranoid.
Exactly.
They spend more, they click more, they watch more.
Exactly.
So now the algorithms are literally intentionally decided. I mean, Zuck gets hauled in front of Congress for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and the rest of them are all doing it too, because they all have learned the same trick.
Yeah, exactly. So that the discerning, for me, the overlay or the connection is similar to what we were discussing around dreams. With the psychosis side of it is where the paranoia, when it's within my sense of like I'm still an individual thinking and I'm having paranoid thoughts and maybe unpleasant emotions coming from that. But the psychosis element is actually when the energy, the sense of that is felt in the environment. This is a tangent. I've been really in this a lot, and exploring it and talking to people around it, but it's a whole thing. And the relevance around that, how that can shape the perspective in dreams, and I like the learning lab idea. I love that. And also even, in that Jungian framework, there's the idea of, the wise old man or wise woman meeting a mentor in the dreamscape that can.
Oh yeah, I've met a bunch of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember this one. I had grabbed these 3 jewels of power in this contest of flying, and I now had the red jewel and the blue jewel and the yellow jewel, and I now had all the power of the primary colors. And this guy who was sort of like in a toga, who was kind of like a little bit like older and cynical, he probably was like 70 or something, was like, okay, now you got the power, what you gonna do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
With that kind of like, again, I can imagine the comment section. Sorry, please continue.
well, this is so interesting because
important question.
It's a huge line of inquiry, because how do I phrase this? There's more, the stance in a dream is more surrendered to, I'm having this dream. Therefore, like an encounter with a character, there's a lot more receptivity because it's seen as like my dream. Whereas in waking reality, if you meet a mentor, that the ego is more solid. So that message could be neglected. The warning, the cynical old man saying like, check yourself on the way, it might just be, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, that there's less of an ego defense in the dream world that I sense could, if people are willing to listen and engage, be a real sobering way of staying grounded on the path, because your own psyche and potentially mentors from other dimensions or other kind of domains, however you want to describe it, are working with you to on the way as well, and trying to point out maybe blind spots that we don't see in this reality so clearly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that the potential for exploring shadow, as anybody who's ever noticed in dreams, they might do all kinds of things that they wouldn't possibly admit to doing in waking life, or even, allow themselves to contemplate. And then you find yourself doing them, or these situations happening, or watching them, or whatever it is, depending on your vantage point. And yeah, like huge. I haven't said anything particularly profound there, but just to recognize that.
No, it's good, because now I'm thinking as well of the staying with this idea of the self, or at least like as we talk to it, the self in, what am I trying to say? The false dichotomy, or what I perceive to be a false dichotomy between waking and dreaming when it comes to the self.
I mentioned that earlier. Yeah, is this that different? Is the waking world that different? Are we sure? How do we know?
Yeah.
Like, I can't fly in this realm. It's one of its only obvious defining characteristics. I can't walk through walls in this realm. Like, there's certain magical things that I appear to be able to do in every other realm, just not this one. So like, it has certain, it was somebody else, maybe it was Bill Hamilton or Kenneth Folk or something. This is the only realm in which I can't fly. So I just want to give credit. What credit is due? I can't remember which one of them said it, but one of them did. Yes, but in so many other ways, like this, extremely similar to dream life. Is this just one extremely long dream, or the dream of a dreaming God that's dreaming an eon? How many rabbit holes do you want to go down with that? How far, on what time scales, what levels?
So for me, I'll share another dream. I shared it in another interview, so I don't want to bore my listeners too much, but it was a really, I mentioned previously around like the hyper-lucidity and looking at the environment. And long story short, I had a dream that became lucid when I was in my early 20s. And rather than, I'd had a few where I just like played around. And with this one, it was the first time where I really looked at the environment, and I picked a leaf, not dissimilar from this, like just the structure here, like seeing the intricacy of it and the luminosity. Now, you also mentioned around like the dream reflecting ahead of time a stage of insight. That when that dream happened, it was a completely different way of perceiving. It was incredibly powerful. I'm not doing it justice right now how I'm describing it, because I'm thinking of how to weave it in, but it was an incredibly heart-opening, expansive, life-changing dream that I had, and a lot of it was just based around looking at the leaf, seeing it had this pulsating aliveness to it, and realizing there's no way that my material brain is just conjuring this from random bits of data throughout the day. And the process at a later date of a perceptual shift in waking reality, where my perception started to mirror more like the dream, where I was looking at things, I use the word enchantment, but there was a increased luminosity in the waking world. Could you maybe speak to that in terms of what we commonly call awakening and the perceptual shift in this domain, and how that could perhaps be mirrored in dreams, either preemptively or enhanced, or whatever comes to mind around that?
Again, most of the time, as people who know me and are familiar with my stuff, I'll just say that whole sort of band of that kind of stuff happening, I think of as A and P territory in a loose kind of way, meaning that it is not uncommon for dreams and waking life both to share this quality of something very insightful, more luminous, more bright, more sharp, more clear, more blissful, more insightful, more connected, more magical, more enchanted, more archetypal, more synchronistic, more that whole thing. And exactly which of those elements, how strongly. So, and I usually assume that those two things are going to kind of arise in the same general thing. And it often spans dreams and waking kind of equally. So I just think of all of that as kind of like a specific band of important insights. And then how does that relate to awakening, depending on whose models you're using and where you want to draw your lines? Some people would call that, like, from a technical Buddhist pattern, like a Sotapan minor, or like a pseudo nirvana is like or something where it's like, yeah, this has a lot of qualities that are quite profound and like glimpses or hints or first establishment understanding of something that will later then has the potential to mature, often through some dark period in between, right? So, but not always. And so again, it just depends on whose maps you want to use and what you want to define awakening as. But clearly, a lot of those qualities that we find in that general band of territory are, have something awakening-ish to them, as has been noted a lot, right? Holding the maps and lines more loosely.
You mentioned nearly, I know, I think I read in your book, you've maybe not explored dream yoga as much as other practices, but I wonder if you have practices that you've go on.
I mean, in terms of like formally doing the thing where you're like setting the clock to wake up and you're visualizing the particular symbols like you would find in something like Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep by Tenzin Wangyal, which is also a really cool book, and techniques. I haven't done as much of that because I really like my sleep. But that said, one of the reasons I really like my sleep is because, since I was a kid, I've had this propensity to explore that territory with a relative degree of ease. So I haven't found the need, like just thinking about it, just reading a book like that is often enough to trigger having those experiences. Like it can kind of pre-program in a kind of pre-scripted kind of way, having these things happen. Like I remember when I was reading B. Alan Wallace's, was it Dreaming Yourself Awake, I think? Anyway, my brain names and titles is glitchy, but his book on dream yoga stuff, and which I may have gotten the title right. And, he was talking about, can you close your eyes in a dream and then see what you see? And just having read that, I started closing my eyes in dreams and having all sorts of strange experiences, right? It's a very interesting thing to do. Or like Carlos Castaneda, when I was reading, maybe The Eagle's Gift or something is one of these, or Journey to Ishlan. I can't remember. One of these books one of the later books is talking about like some of the dream yoga stuff where like you see your hand in a dream or you see whatever like that. That'll just start happening. So I don't. So for whatever reason, the way I'm wired, like this thing is very scriptable and kind of programmable by like subtle nudges. It doesn't take a lot to have these things kind of happen. So I haven't really, and then just the simple fact of me going on retreats, like I do these fire casino retreats where you're doing a lot of very intense stuff related to visuals, and those uniformly will make my dream life much more lucid, interesting, rich, powerful. Will push the spectrum to the higher, to more of the interesting qualities that just by the nature of doing a retreat like that. So I haven't really had to. If I wanted those experiences and hadn't had them, I'd probably do more of those formal practices.
Yeah. With because you mentioned the Kasina, is it fire Kasina, the different types, if I'm correct? How do you view so we have the dream where the body's asleep, visions, and we just kind of accept that as like, oh, that happens, not viewing how incredibly mental it is that happens every night, that we hallucinate and there are all these dimensions, everything we discuss, and we just act as if it's normal. But there's also I think I touched upon this as well, like the visions, and in the meditation, as you describe, actually meditating with visual imagery and allowing that to take on a life of its own. Getting the Jungian framework would be active imagination. How do you view the fluidity of those domains? How would you view that in terms of bodies asleep, dream, and then visualizations? in whatever way.
Visualizations, eyes closed, is sort
Eyes
of the next
closed.
level, right? Where you're
Yeah.
seeing entities or energies. Like if you would take a DMT and close your eyes and you can see whatever thing, or
Mm-hmm.
even sometimes. And then can you do it with eyes open? Like, so you're seeing that in the room with you. That's kind of a next level. And then you can get all the way to the stage of malleable. So the stage of malleable and wieldly, or just malleability as we sometimes call it, is a rare stage, but you can get to it. And in that stage, your waking life, like, no, you're not asleep. You're on a retreat and you're walking around, you're on the grounds. It's not actually a sleep dream. It's a waking dream. It behaves like dreams, like where you can make things appear, you can change things into other things, you can do strange stuff, you can, at least to your own experience, like walk through a wall. Usually you snap back to your body or whatever, like an OBE, but like whatever it is, like it becomes dream malleable in the same way that a lucid dream with some control can become. And at that point you realize, like, okay, wait a second. Like, you only have to have experienced that once before your whole sense of what this is, like this waking is shifted forever. Because then you recognize that in the same way that, if you want to call it predictive pre-processing or intention or self-hypnosis or whatever you want to call it, you can get into states where this has the ability to do the dream thing. At least for you. How does that relate to anybody else's experience is variable. And that's where it gets weird, is when you start to have shared experiences with other people, like usually on retreat, and usually also up on the realms of concentration and deeper practice. Like that's where it starts to get super bizarre and starts to really shift your paradigms. I'm not saying these are real or not real. What I will say is that they're causal. So and again, there's this sort of funny thing, I've mentioned this on other podcasts, where like people have this definition of real, and then they have things that they would certainly admit are causal that are outside of the definition of real. That's kind of weird when you think about it. Like dreams are causal, but they're not real. Magical experiences where you're like drawing symbols in the air and seeing them, Doctor Strange style, are not real, but they are causal. Like, so you got to be kind of careful with those kinds of questions. But those are the things that really will stretch you into the territory where, like, some of the spiritual traditions will describe this is all a dream in the same way other things are a dream. If you've had some of those experiences just as a result of strong concentration. Oh, and then the other thing I want to mention is realms. So realms, full-on realm experiences. I'll give an example. A month and a half ago, I was sitting here at my desk, and all of a sudden there was like, I was just doing computer work, and all of a sudden it felt like something just kind of subtly shifted. And then, like, whatever that means, blew out a cloud of like sparkly white mist, just like floated over my monitors. Like, like white sparkly. And then there was like a very subtle shift, and then reality was normal again. Like, so a weird magical thing happened, but I will call that a realm experiences. And I differentiate realms from OBEs in that the shift into them is often exceedingly subtle. It's not dramatic, like a lift out. It doesn't have a snapback. It doesn't have a buzz and paralysis. It doesn't have the hyperkinetic thing. It feels as real as this. It feels like normal, but you will notice, if you're really paying attention, there's like a shift or a something, and then you're in realm territory, and in realm territory, it might look exactly like this, except it can do weird stuff. And then subtle shift, and you're back, and like, okay, I can't breathe sparkly mist. I can't, like, what is that? I don't know. But like, so just recognizing that those kinds of experiences can dramatically blur the sort of sense of what is dream, what is real, particularly if you don't notice the subtle realm shift, right? Because if I hadn't noticed the extremely subtle realm shift, I'd be like, okay, what is that? But having had a bunch of these things happen over the years, when you notice the subtle realm shift, you're like, okay, anything can happen. You don't take it too, I mean, still it's archetypally interesting. Why did I breathe sparkly mist? Like, why? I don't know why that happened. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. But, that is an interesting additional kind of dreamlike thing that can be very, very subtle in terms of the entrance and exit from it.
There is so much I want to respond to. What's your time like today? I know we scheduled
I unfortunately have 4 minutes left.
Okay.
But I would love to have another one of these if you want to.
Please.
It's been really, I love this stuff. I love dream stuff. It's
Yeah.
fun talking with you.
Yeah,
so,
me.
And hearing your thoughts on this. So, and stories
Yeah,
and adventures.
I'd love a part two. It's so fascinating. And okay, so many things come up because we're kind of, part two might be a nice bridge. I'm gonna, after dreams, look at divine madness. And
I could be free in about an hour and a half if you wanted to do another one. Just say.
I won't have time today, unfortunately. Okay. Although I'd love to. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm going to do a segue from dreams and then divine madness and looking at the nuances. Again, the Paranoia inspired that.
Extremely close to the heart of the EPRC's work as well. So
exactly, yeah. And looking at, like, hearing you talk, then we desperately need an understanding of the notion of a hallucination depends so much on what is the definition of reality. And when you have a reality that's materialistic, it's seen as objectively fixed, which, correct me if I'm wrong, all spiritual traditions argue against through verifiable means.
Everyone that I know of. Verifiable depends on your epistemic choices.
That's true.
How you think you can understand what reality is. But
yeah, but it touches upon that there seems to be, there's this idea, right? I think Jung himself said that he believes that people are always dreaming. Like the unconscious doesn't stop. It's just we almost like zone it out throughout the day. But when you think of a daydream, images that come to mind, could it be that the dream world is always there? And there
certainly
seems to
countless people have done hallucinogens have, or psychedelics, whatever you want to call them, and theogens, pick your favorite name, have come to that sort of conclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to remove the filters and the barriers that keep that life from flooding in.
Yeah. And then the symbiotic and similar with synchronicity, the imaginal, these realms you talk to and how they interface with this realm suddenly takes on an entirely different scope of understanding. Daniel, I'll end this there, but I've loved this so much and I'd love to do a part two and maybe we can pick up where we left off in terms of that. That would be awesome. Thanks again so much for your time. I'm so happy you had this conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Really fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mind That Ego podcast. To stay up to date, you can join the Mind That Ego mailing list if you head to mindthatego.com/MFM. You'll also get a copy of my book, Mindsets for Mindfulness, when you join. You can also follow Mind That Ego on Facebook and YouTube, where the podcasts are also displayed in video format along with other inspired videos that I create. Or if Instagram is more your social media of choice, you can follow me at Ricky_Deriz. That's DERISZ.